What is the difference between people with Asperger syndrome and those who are on the spectrum, the autism spectrum, but are not high functioning? What are the differences? Well, we have identified 8 of them. I'm sure there are more, but these are the more obvious differences so that you can tell this person, they seem to be on the spectrum, but I don't think they're severe. I think they have Asperger's syndrome. So, what are these 8 differences? Number one is this: connection, or we could say connectivity. So, I say connection, and that is that people with Asperger's syndrome as compared to autistics, and those are the 2 terms, by the way, we're going to use. People with Asperger's syndrome tend to be more connected to the world. They have a worldview, that is to say, they sometimes have very defined religious views, whereas those who are autistics seem to be disconnected. They don't have political views, they don't have social views, they don't have religious views unless somebody else is imposing them on those individuals. And that's perfectly okay. In fact, maybe it'd be better if we didn't have such defined views. Maybe we would all get along. But that is one of the differences. Number 2 is this: intelligence. Aspies tend to be a little bit brighter. Well, not a little bit brighter, sometimes significantly more intelligent than people with autism, those who are not high functioning. That becomes very apparent, and that is one of the markers, and that is one of the reasons why they can't always detect autism or Asperger syndrome until later in life. And that, by the way, is number 3, age of onset. People with autism usually have their traits detected early in life. I'm talking ages 3 and 4, preschoolers. And the reason is, number 1, it's kind of obvious that they're not making eye contact like other children would. They may be slower to develop social skills. They don't like to play with other children the way that typical, neurotypical children would. And so parents find it very concerning because it is so very obvious that there's something amiss here, and they don't know what it is, so they consult, or they may know what it is if they're attuned to what's going on, but if they don't, they typically will contact somebody because, well, they love their children, they care about them, and if there's something wrong there, they want to know what it is so they can get help for their kids, so they can live a normal life or something close to a normal life. And so they get help early in life, and that makes such a huge difference. But people with Asperger syndrome, that's not necessarily the case. In fact, as you have heard me say in other videos, I was not diagnosed officially until I was 66 years old. Now, I'm almost 70 years old now, and life has become kind of my laboratory. And many of the things I talk about in this series of videos, not only from what I've read and learned from study, but also from life experience. I call it life's laboratory. So I received my official diagnosis at age 66. Now, I knew that I had Asperger syndrome long before that. I just never had it diagnosed. But once I had a meltdown, okay, I said, I got to go talk to somebody. And so I took a few months and I did my research and my due diligence, and I found a very good therapist who specialized in autism. We did a video, and you're going to want to watch this. You'll have to go to our YouTube channel and find the video. Not hard to find. The video is about what to do and how to find a therapist, and what to do and what to expect before you go talk to the therapist. That is a very helpful, beneficial video. So age of onset is one of the key differences. Why does it take so long to identify somebody with Asperger syndrome? It is because it's hard to tell. They say, I think this guy is just kind of quiet. I think maybe he's just shy. Or they will say, hey, just well behaved, or her. Or they may say, when you get into your teens, they say, well, he's just mature for his age because he doesn't get into trouble like the other kids. where in reality, that person may just be withdrawn from his social environment, his milieu, because he or she has Asperger syndrome. But nobody detects it. They just think, what a good kid. They don't realize that this individual in their head is having some serious difficulties navigating through life, particularly socially. Number 4 is cognitive functioning. Autistics often have difficulty responding to other people. This includes many times low executive function, frontal cortex. Then again, there's this thing called emotional meltdowns that afflict people sometimes with Asperger syndrome. So, yeah, people who are autistic, not high functioning, they have some real challenges with cognitive functioning. But that's not to say people with Asperger's don't. We also have some difficulties. They're just not as noticeable, maybe not as persistent, not as pervasive, but they're still there. And often they come out in an emotional outburst. That's not a good thing for anybody to experience, especially if you are in a public place, you have Asperger syndrome, and say you're at a shopping mall or if you're in an airport, they have tight security in airports. And you have a meltdown in an airport, you're going to be surrounded by security, or you're at least going to be on their radar, more so than others. They're going to pay very close attention to you. So there are some behavior patterns that betray that they're on the spectrum, but they're not as pervasive. They're not as ubiquitous. Number 5 is this: vocabulary. Autistics find it challenging to come up with words. They don't necessarily know what words it is they're supposed to use. They have a very limited vocabulary. Well, the difference between autistics and people with Asperger syndrome is that we tend to have, those of us on the Asperger syndrome spectrum, that end of the spectrum, tend to have a higher than normal vocabulary. Now, I've got a theory about that. I don't know if this has ever been tested and proven, but I think it's because the reason we have a higher vocabulary may not just be cognitive functioning, but it could be that we like things neat and in order. And there's certain words that better describe things, so that kind of puts our world in a more orderly perspective from our point of view. And so we use these big words that some people, not necessarily big words, but uncommonly used words that other people normally don't use in their daily talk, their daily conversation. Now, as children, that makes us seem to be extremely intelligent, and maybe that's one of the reasons, higher IQ. And it also turns out that adults prefer to talk to children with higher vocabularies because, well, they're just easier to communicate with. They sound smart, they sound like adults, so they talk to them, but they're still kids. They still have limited life experience, but they're fun to talk to. And again, sometimes the very traits of Asperger syndrome is what hides it, because it's misunderstood. It's misdiagnosed as being something that it's not. Number 6 again is verbal communication. Number 5 is vocabulary. So Aspergians find it difficult to socialize. Very difficult to socialize. Now, if you have Asperger syndrome, if you're an Aspie, you may have experienced something like this. You have watched television, or you have watched a movie in the theater, or you have maybe even watched a stage play, and you're observing it. You're not part of the TV show. You're not part of Ozzie and Harriet, or the Brady Bunch or whatever you happen to watch. Okay, I'm dating myself, but you get the idea. You're not a part of that show. You're not a part of the stage play. You're not part of the movie. You're not there with Batman or whatever movie. But it seems like, are you listening? Because this is important. It seems like life is a movie. And the difference is between observing it on a screen is that you are actually in the movie, but you're just an observer. You're not a participant. You're not one of the actors. The only difference is you're watching the movie from inside the movie. That is what it's like many times to have Asperger syndrome. And people wonder, why is this guy so aloof? Why is she so distant? It's because she's not participating, or he is not participating, because you don't participate in a movie, you watch it. You don't participate in the play. If you do, they kick you out. You don't participate in Ozzie and Harriet. I mean, that was recorded years ago. And so you're just an observer. It's just a movie, just a TV show. So there is this thing with verbal communication. We don't communicate because, well, we're not participating. We're not part of it. We're just there to watch. Number 7 is skills and abilities. Autistics usually have very difficult times taking care of themselves personally. For example, they may not be able to brush their teeth. Severe cases, they may not be able to comb their hair. They may not be able to dress themselves. Whereas high functioning, and that's why they call it high functioning autistics can do all those things. Okay, maybe not comb their hair, but everything else they can do. People with Asperger syndrome are notorious for having bad hair. And it's not necessarily bad hair, it's just that we don't seem to find the need to have perfect hair. We want to have comfortable hair. Hairspray is okay, but, I'd rather it be free-flowing. Now, I kind of found this out the hard way because I thought I was pretty good with hair. And I would go to great lengths to make my hair look perfect. But fortunately, there was a hairstylist who straightened me out on that and said, Ken, let me give you a free haircut. And she told me why my hair looked bad. And I looked in the mirror and she's right. As good as I thought I was at it, I just something I wasn't very good at. So, skills and abilities, people with Asperger syndrome, with the exception of hair, tend to be very high functioning, or typical functioning, I should say, like everybody else. Now, we also tend to dress differently, now comparing not to autistics, but with neurotypical people, and we may do a video on those differences. But they think we dress funny because we dress comfortably. And the way that I like to express it is neurotypical clothing is like wearing sandpaper with a sandy part on the inside. Scratchy, itchy, very uncomfortable, particularly on hot summer days. All right, that takes us to number 8, and we already touched on this briefly, but number 8 is speech delay. Autistics typically are late in learning to speak. That's why it is so easily to detect it early on, as we said before. Whereas Aspergians develop their speech normally, in fact, they may be even a little bit advanced or substantially advanced, particularly, I think, if they have higher intellects. And as we said earlier, they have much larger vocabularies than their peers. And sometimes their peers will find that very annoying, but repeating what we said earlier, adults seem to find it very pleasant. They like to talk with children with Asperger syndrome because they talk on their level or close to it. Look on your screen, you see those two boxes, actually the rectangles. When you click on those, you get more of what you just heard. And these videos never get old. Some of the videos we made months ago or even a year or so ago are still as fresh as if we made them today, because this information just doesn't get old.